Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Slumber. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. Tonight, we'll spend the next 2 hours exploring slow, atmospheric horror stories, thoughtfully narrated to help you unwind, quiet your mind, and gently drift towards sleep. There will be only 2 or 3 ads during the first 10 minutes. After that, the rest of the journey is completely uninterrupted. If you enjoy eerie stories told with a calm voice and a peaceful atmosphere, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another night of haunting tales. Now, make yourself comfortable. Let your body become completely still and allow the sounds of the outside world to slowly disappear into silence. Tonight, the night has grown quiet, the shadows have begun to stir, and an old story is waiting to be remembered. So close your eyes, take a slow, gentle breath, listen carefully, and let the darkness rock you gently into haunted slumber. Let's begin. Story 1. I live in a very small village. It is so small that everyone knows everyone else. We know who wakes first in the morning, who burns their bread, who argues with their spouse, and who forgets to close their curtains at night. The people here say our village has everything it needs. There is a baker who wakes before sunrise and fills the main road with the smell of fresh bread. There is a teacher who works in the only schoolhouse and teaches every child, no matter their age. There is a town hall, a small clinic, a blacksmith, a farmer, and more woodsmen than we could ever need. There is also a little shop that sells candles, salt, needles, buttons, and nearly anything else a person might need. We have clean water from the stone well in the middle of the square. We grow vegetables behind our houses. We keep chickens, goats, and a few cows. The village is quiet, safe, and protected. Everyone has enough. That is what the adults always say. We have everything we need. They say it when someone asks why we never trade with other villages. They say it when a child wonders whether there are cities beyond the hills. They say it whenever anyone asks what lies past the forest. We have everything we need. Everyone is supposed to be happy. Most people seem to be. But I am not. I do not have everything I need because I need answers. I have always been curious. The teacher calls curiosity a gift when it concerns mathematics, history, or the names of plants. She does not call it a gift when I ask questions about the forest. The forest surrounds our village on every side. It begins beyond a wide circle of tree stumps. The stumps form the border between our homes and the living trees. Each stump is blackened around its edges, as though the trees were burned before they were cut down. No one crosses that border. No one steps beneath the shadow of the forest. Even on bright summer days, when the branches stretch toward the village and their shadows reach over the stumps, people move away. Children are taught the rules as soon as they can walk. Do not cross the line. Do not stand beneath the shadow of a tree's crown. Do not follow any sound that comes from the woods. We do not enter the forest. The rules are repeated so often that most people never question them. I do. Why can't we go into the forest? I once asked my mother. Because we don't, she replied. But why? It is dangerous. What is dangerous about it? The forest. That was all she would say. I asked my father. He told me the woods were too thick and that a person could easily become lost. I pointed out that our woodsmen entered the trees to collect wood. My father's face tightened. They do not enter the forest. Where does the wood come from then? From the border. That was true. The woodsmen only cut trees that grew close to the line. They worked quickly. and they never allowed the shadow of a branch to touch them. Before sunset, they dragged the logs into the village and burned the leaves. They never looked between the trees. They never spoke while working. One of the woodsmen, an old man named Harrow, was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. I once asked if he had lost them while cutting wood. He looked at the forest and said, "Something took them." What? He stared at me for so long that I became uncomfortable. Then he walked away. I asked the baker, the teacher, the blacksmith, and the people at the town hall. They all gave me different answers, but none of them truly explained anything. There were wolves. There were holes in the ground. There were poisonous plants. The trees were unstable. The forest was too large. The paths changed. It was forbidden. Whenever I asked what lay on the other side, people became silent. Some said there was nothing beyond it. Others said there were more villages like ours. The teacher once said the world was much larger than the forest, but when I asked how she knew, she immediately ended the lesson. That only made me more curious. At night, I listened to the forest from my bedroom. My house stands near the edge of the village, so the trees are visible from my window. During the day, they look like an endless wall of green. At night, they become a single dark shape. Sometimes the leaves rustle even when there is no wind. Sometimes branches knock together in a slow rhythm. Creak, creak, creak. On certain nights I hear whistling. It is not the sound of the wind. The tune is too clear and too careful. It repeats the same few notes, stops for a while, and begins again. I once whistled the tune back. The forest became completely silent. The next morning there was a fresh crack in the stump nearest our house. My mother saw it and covered it with salt. She did not ask whether I had heard anything. I think she knew. This morning I decided I could not live without knowing. I packed a small piece of bread, a bottle of water, and a knife. I also took a piece of chalk because I planned to mark the trees and follow the marks home. I did not tell anyone what I intended to do. I thought I would have to sneak away at night, but I could not wait that long. The question had been growing inside me for years. By breakfast, it felt so large that there was no space left for fear. I left my house after my parents went to work. The village square was busy. The baker carried trays to his shop. The teacher rang the school bell. Farmers led animals toward their fields. I walked directly toward the border. At first, no one noticed. Then the blacksmith stopped hammering. The sound of metal striking metal disappeared. The baker froze in his doorway. The teacher stood outside the schoolhouse with one hand still holding the bell rope. One by one, people turned toward me. I expected someone to shout. I expected my mother or father to run from somewhere and drag me back. No one moved. I continued walking. The crowd watched in silence. A few people lowered their heads. Others looked frightened. Old Harrow stood beside a wagon full of logs. When I passed him, he gripped the wood with his 3 remaining fingers. "Don't cross the line," he whispered. "Tell me why." He looked toward the forest. "I can't. Then I have to find out." His mouth opened, but no words came. I reached the circle of stumps. The nearest trees stood only a few steps beyond them. Their branches formed a roof of leaves that blocked most of the morning light. I looked back. Almost the entire village had gathered behind me. No one tried to stop me. That frightened me more than if they had shouted. My mother stood near the well. She had one hand pressed against her mouth. My father was beside her. Neither called my name. For a moment, I nearly returned. Then I looked at the trees. I stepped over the line. A shadow fell across my face. Behind me, someone began to cry. I entered the forest. The air changed immediately. It was cooler beneath the branches, but also heavier. Each breath smelled of damp soil, moss, and old leaves. For the first few minutes, I could still see the village between the trunks. The people remained by the border, watching. I raised one hand and waved. No one waved back. I continued walking. Soon, the trees hid the village completely. I used the chalk to draw an arrow on the first trunk. The bark was rough and dark. The chalk broke when I pressed too hard, leaving a thick white mark. I marked another tree a few steps later, then another. At first, I felt excited. I heard leaves rustling above me. The wind moved through the branches and whistled a gentle tune. Somewhere far away, a bird called. I smiled. I had always wanted to hear birds inside the forest. There were birds in the village, but only small brown ones that searched the roads for crumbs. The teacher had shown us drawings of many different kinds. My favorite was the mockingbird. I liked the idea of a bird that could remember the songs of others and sing them back. Maybe I would see one. I imagined returning to the village with a feather, a strange flower, or some other proof that the forest was not as terrible as everyone believed. Perhaps the adults were only afraid because they had never entered it. Perhaps I would be the first person to return. The ground was flat and easy to walk across. That seemed strange. Forests in the teacher's books had bushes, fallen logs, streams, rocks, and tangled roots. This forest had almost none of those things. Only trees. Oak tree after oak tree stood in perfect rows. Their trunks were almost the same width. Their branches began at the same height, and their leaves were the same shade of green. I walked between them as if moving through a giant hall filled with wooden pillars. I counted the rows at first. 10, 20, 30. After a while, I stopped. For every row I passed, 2 more seemed to appear. I looked back to check my chalk marks. There were none. I returned to the nearest tree I remembered marking. The bark was clean. Perhaps I had chosen the wrong trunk. I searched several others. No white arrows remained. I still had the chalk in my hand, so I drew another mark. This time, I watched it carefully. The line stayed on the bark. I stepped backward. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bark shifted. It moved slowly around the mark, closing over it like skin healing across a wound. Within seconds, the chalk disappeared beneath the wood. I touched the place where it had been. The bark felt warm. I pulled my hand away. The whistling continued. I told myself I was still walking in a straight line. If I turned around and continued directly backward, I would eventually reach the village. I decided to go a little farther first. That was when I saw the birch tree. It stood far behind me, just beyond the place where my eyes could clearly focus. Among the dark oak trunks, its pale body was easy to notice. I turned fully around. For 1 second, I saw it. The tree was tall and thin. Its bark was white, with black markings that looked like closed eyes. Then it was gone. Only rows of oaks remained. I stared for a long time. Perhaps the light had fallen strangely across one of the trunks. I continued walking. Several minutes later, I felt the need to look back again. The birch was there. This time it seemed closer. Its pale trunk stood between 2 rows of oaks. Thin branches reached outward, but I could not tell whether there were leaves on them. The black marks in the bark looked different from normal birch patterns. They resembled eyes, hundreds of narrow, burnt eyes. All of them seemed to face me. I blinked. The tree disappeared. I hurried forward. The rows of oaks continued without end. I tried walking faster. Then I ran for a while. Nothing changed. The same trunks passed on both sides. The same leaves covered the sky. The same dark soil remained beneath my feet. I stopped to drink water. The bottle was empty. I knew I had filled it before leaving. I turned it upside down. A small amount of dark soil fell from the opening. My bread was gone too. The cloth around it remained in my pocket, but the food had disappeared. I began thinking about the village. My parents were probably still standing at the line, or perhaps they had returned to work. Maybe they believed I would come back when I became hungry. I turned around and started walking toward home. After several minutes, I saw the birch again. It stood directly in the path. The trunk was pale and narrow. Its branches stretched high above the oaks. The black eyes in the bark were open now. I could see small white centers inside them. I stopped. The tree leaned slightly toward me. Its wood creaked. Creak, creak, creak. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the birch was gone. I ran. I no longer cared which direction I was moving. I only wanted to escape the rows of trees. The rustling above me stopped. So did the distant birds. The forest became silent except for the whistling. The tune was clearer now. It was the same melody I had heard from my bedroom at night. I recognized the notes. Without thinking, I began counting them. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3. It sounded almost like someone trying to say my name without words. I covered my ears. The sound continued inside my head. Then the trees began to creak. Not one tree. All of them. Creak, creak, creak. The oaks moved. At first I thought the wind was bending them. There was no wind. Their roots pulled free from the soil. Long wooden shapes rose beneath the trunks like legs. The trees stepped out of their perfect rows. Bark split open as they moved. Branches lowered toward me. The forest closed around me. I ran between the trunks. A branch struck my shoulder and tore through my shirt. Another scratched my cheek. The trees shifted faster, blocking every opening. I turned left. An oak stepped into my path. I turned right. Roots rose from the ground like thick snakes. I jumped over them and nearly fell. Branches reached down, cutting my arms and face as I passed. I tried to run back, but there was no back anymore. The trees surrounded me in every direction. Their trunks pressed closer. The space between them became too narrow to pass through. The creaking grew louder. I could not continue. I could not turn around. I looked up. The branches of the nearest oak stretched above me. If I could climb beyond the lower branches, perhaps the trees would not be able to reach me. From the top, I might also see the village. I grabbed the bark. It moved beneath my hand. The surface squirmed like muscle. Small cracks opened between the pieces of bark. Sharp edges closed around my fingers. The tree bit into my palms. I screamed but did not let go. I placed one foot against the trunk and pulled myself upward. The bark twisted beneath me. It tried to push me away. Splinters entered my hands. Blood ran down my wrists and arms. I climbed higher. Branches struck at my back. One wrapped briefly around my ankle, but I kicked until it released me. The trunk shook. I almost fell. My bloody hand slipped, and for a moment I hung from one arm. The ground below moved with roots and branches. I forced myself upward. At last I reached the crown. I pulled myself onto the highest branch strong enough to hold me. The tree continued moving beneath me, but the branches near the top were thinner and slower. I climbed until I was above the leaves. Then I looked around. I expected to see the village. I expected smoke rising from chimneys, the schoolhouse roof, or the open fields. There was nothing. There were no roads, no houses, no border of stumps, no hills or distant towns. There were no birds, no clouds, no sun. There was not even a sky. Above me was only a pale emptiness that had no color and no end. Below it stretched the forest. Trees filled the world in every direction. An endless sea of green crowns rolled toward the horizon. They moved slowly, pushing and twisting against one another. I could not tell where the forest began or ended. It was everything. I began to cry. The village had never been outside the forest. It had been a small, empty space surrounded by it. A hole. A place the trees had chosen not to fill. I looked for that hole. There was no sign of it. Then something rose far beyond the oaks. At first, I thought it was a tower. It stood taller than every other tree, so tall that its upper branches disappeared into the pale emptiness above. Its trunk was white. The tree was thin despite its impossible height. It rose like a bone pushed through the earth. Black patterns covered its bark, not hundreds of eyes. Millions. They were burnt into every part of the trunk and branches. Some were small. Others were larger than houses. None blinked. All of them watched me. The birch tree's branches stretched across the horizon. They held no leaves. They reached in every direction, passing above the oak forest like long, pale arms. At first, I thought the branches were simply moving in the distance. Then I saw what they were doing. They were searching. Thin twigs lowered toward the trees below, touching one crown and then another, feeling, testing, looking for something. One branch moved toward me. It crossed miles in seconds. As it came closer, I saw shapes caught among the smaller twigs. Clothing, shoes, bones, people. Some were old and dry, hanging like decorations. Others moved weakly. A woodsman's coat hung from one branch. 2 fingers were still caught inside its glove. I thought of Harrow. Something behind me whistled. I turned. The branch was already above me. The black eyes along its white bark opened wider. I understood why no one had followed me. I understood why the villagers had only watched. They had seen this happen before. Perhaps every curious person eventually entered the forest. Perhaps the village gave the birch someone from time to time so that its branches would not reach across the border and take everyone. The tree beneath me shuddered. Its crown began to lower. The surrounding oaks bent toward the great birch as if bowing. The pale branch descended. A thin twig brushed across my face. It felt like a finger. The whistling stopped. For the first time, I heard a voice. It came from every black eye in the bark. It sounded like my mother, my father, the teacher, the baker, and everyone else in the village speaking together. We have everything we need. The branch curled around my waist. I tried to fight it, but my hands were too damaged to hold on. The oak released me. The birch lifted me into the pale emptiness. Below, the forest continued moving. For one moment, I saw a small circle among the trees. The village. The people still stood beside the border, looking upward. They could see me. My mother raised one hand. I could not tell whether she was waving goodbye or asking me to forgive her. Then the oaks closed together and hid them. The branch carried me higher. The birch's trunk filled my vision. The patterns in its bark were not simply shaped like eyes. They were eyes. Inside each black opening, I saw a face. Children, adults, woodsmen, people who had crossed the line before me. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. A new crack opened in the pale bark. It was shaped like an eye. My eye. The branch pulled me toward it. I screamed until my throat hurt. The forest below answered with a deep, endless creak. Now I know why we are told not to enter. I know why no one walks beneath the shadow of a tree's crown. I know why the woodsmen never look between the trunks. The forest is not made of trees. The trees are only parts of one thing, one body, one mind. And above all of them, watching through every branch and every trunk, stands the creature that holds the entire forest together, pale and thin, tall enough to scrape against the gates of heaven, covered in a million charred, unblinking eyes. Its branches stretch beyond the horizon, always reaching, always searching for another person to hold. It is not hiding in the forest. It is the forest. It is a birch tree. Story 2. I am a busy man. That is what I have always told people. Whenever I forgot a birthday, missed a school event, canceled dinner, or failed to return a phone call, I gave them the same explanation. I was busy. My wife, Elizabeth, and I had been married for more than 35 years. We met at a university lecture when we were both young enough to believe life would wait for us. I noticed her before she noticed me. She sat 3 rows ahead, taking notes in a small blue notebook. Her hair fell over one shoulder whenever she leaned forward. She asked the speaker 2 questions at the end of the lecture, both far more intelligent than anything I could have thought of. Afterward, I waited outside and pretended we had met by accident. We started seeing each other soon after that. At first, I made time for her. I took her to quiet restaurants, concerts, museums, and long walks through the city. I listened when she spoke because everything about her still felt new. I remembered the names of her friends, the books she loved, and the places she wanted to visit. She wanted to become a teacher. Later, she considered becoming a writer. For a short time, she talked about opening a small bookshop with a cafe at the back. She had notebooks filled with ideas, names for the shop, designs for the windows, lists of authors she wanted to invite for readings. I told her it was a beautiful dream. Then, we married. The children came. Money became tight. My career began moving forward. Without either of us saying it directly, her dreams slowly became less important than mine. She stayed home. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. She would care for the children while they were small, and then she would return to work. But there was always another reason to wait. One child became sick. The second needed help at school. We moved to a larger house. My job required longer hours. By the time the children were old enough to take care of themselves, Elizabeth had been away from her own ambitions for years. She never blamed me. That was one of the many reasons I called her perfect. She anticipated almost every need I had before I spoke. My shirts were cleaned and pressed. Dinner was ready when I returned home. The bills were organized. The children's appointments were handled. The house remained spotless. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, family gatherings, and every small responsibility that I found too unimportant to keep in my head. She made my life easy. I allowed her to disappear while doing it. I worked in finance. No, that is not entirely correct. I lived finance. Mortgages, Loans, interest rates, property deals, company accounts, investments, and debt were the language I understood best. If you wanted to buy a house you could barely afford, I was the man to speak to. If you needed a loan with the lowest possible interest rate, I would smile, shake your hand, and tell you I would search for the best terms available. There is no such thing as a fair loan. There are only contracts people understand and contracts people sign because they are desperate. I became very good at making bad terms look reasonable. I wore expensive suits and invited clients into quiet offices. I poured them coffee, listened to their fears, and then used those fears to convince them to accept agreements that would drain them for years. I did not think of myself as cruel. I was simply good at business. That was another thing I told myself. I was a busy man. My day always began at exactly 5:30 in the morning. Elizabeth woke before me, even though she did not need to. By the time I entered the kitchen, breakfast was usually waiting. 2 soft boiled eggs, salt beside the plate, toast, lightly browned, coffee, black for me, coffee with too much milk and sugar for her. She loved having breakfast together. I rarely stayed long. Most mornings I read the newspaper while she spoke. I nodded at the correct moments and occasionally said things like, "That's interesting," or "You're probably right." I did not listen closely enough to know whether my responses made sense. By 6, I was already thinking about the office. Sometimes I left before finishing the eggs. I told Elizabeth that arriving early gave me time to prepare documents for important clients. That was partly true. It also gave me time alone with whichever young trainee had recently caught my attention. There were several over the years. Women who laughed at my jokes because I controlled part of their future. Women who admired my suit, my office, my car, or the confidence that money had given me. I told myself the affairs meant nothing. I always came home. I paid for the house. I never abandoned my family. I believed those facts made me a good husband. Perhaps Elizabeth knew. Maybe she found perfume on my shirt or saw unfamiliar numbers on the telephone bill. Maybe she noticed how often I showered as soon as I returned home. If she knew, she never confronted me directly. There were moments when she looked at me with a quiet sadness, but I always found another explanation. She was tired. She missed the children. She worried about getting older. It was easier to believe that than to ask whether I was the reason. Today, however, I stayed for breakfast. I placed the newspaper aside. For once, I did not check the financial pages or read about foreign markets. I did not reach for my telephone beneath the table. I sat across from my wife and gave her my full attention. She wore a pale blue dressing gown. It was one I had bought for her years earlier during a business trip. At the time, I had selected it quickly from an airport shop because I felt guilty for forgetting our anniversary. She had loved it. She said blue reminded her of the sea. The cloth had faded over the years, but she still wore it often. I placed 2 eggs in front of her. Soft boiled, of course. I sprinkled salt over them because that was how she liked them. For years, she had prepared my breakfast. Today, I prepared hers. I poured her coffee. Plenty of milk. Plenty of sugar. Gentle and sweet, just like her. She did not drink it. I did not mention that. Instead, I switched on the radio. At first, there was an advertisement for furniture. Then came a news report I did not listen to. Finally, the opening notes of a familiar song filled the kitchen. It was the song we used to dance to when we were young. I remembered a small apartment we rented during the first year of our marriage. The kitchen had been so narrow that we could not open the oven and the cupboard at the same time. One evening, the song came on the radio while Elizabeth was cooking. I stepped behind her, placed my hands around her waist, and pulled her away from the stove. She laughed and complained that the food would burn. I told her I did not care. We danced across the tiny floor while the saucepan boiled over behind us. For years afterward, whenever the song played, she tried to make me dance. At weddings, family parties, and sometimes at home. Eventually, I began refusing. I was tired. My back hurt. I had work to finish. People were watching. There was always a reason. Today, the song played from beginning to end. We did not dance. I watched Elizabeth across the table. She remained quiet. Whenever she used to talk to me, she spoke about small things, her favorite television programs, something one of the children had said, a new recipe she wanted to try, a dream she had during the night, her thoughts about the neighbors, her fears about growing old. She once told me she felt as though she were slowly disappearing. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I was reading an email and did not understand the seriousness in her voice. I told her everyone felt that way sometimes. Then I continued looking at my telephone. Another time she asked whether I still loved her. I kissed her forehead and said of course. I thought that was enough. I had answered the question. I did not ask why she felt the need to ask it. For most of our marriage, I listened only enough to know when it was my turn to speak. Today, I listened properly. I studied every part of her face. The fine lines beside her eyes, the pale skin near her lips, the small mark above her left eyebrow that she had received after falling from a bicycle as a child. I waited for her to tell me about her thoughts, her fears, or the television show she had watched the night before. She said nothing. For once, she did not complain about my work. She did not ask whether I would be home for dinner. She did not remind me that one of the children was calling that evening. She remained completely silent, almost as if, for the first time in her life, she was satisfied. When breakfast was finished, I collected the dishes. It had been years since I had washed them myself. Elizabeth always cleaned everything immediately. She hated leaving dirty plates in the sink. Even when she was ill, she found a way to keep the kitchen spotless. The house had 2 floors filled with the appearance of happiness. Polished floors, clean windows, family photographs arranged neatly along the walls, fresh flowers in the hallway, a dining table large enough for children who no longer lived with us. Visitors often told me how fortunate I was. What would you do without Elizabeth? They asked. I usually laughed. I never considered the question seriously. Today, I washed every plate. I cleaned the eggs from the spoons and dried the cups before returning them to the cupboard. Elizabeth deserved to rest. For more than 35 years, she had carried the weight of our home while I congratulated myself for paying for it. Today, I wanted to lighten her burden, even if only for a few hours. After the dishes were finished, I kissed her cheek. Her skin felt colder than I expected. I told myself the kitchen was cold. The heating had always been unreliable in that part of the house. Every day, though I had rarely noticed, Elizabeth made herself beautiful for me. She applied makeup in the morning, even when she had nowhere to go. A little blush, mascara, powder, lipstick in soft shades of pink or red. She wore perfume, usually something floral and expensive. I bought most of it. Buying gifts had always been easier than giving attention. Whenever I forgot an important date, I arrived home with jewelry, perfume, or flowers. Elizabeth accepted them with a smile. For a long time, I thought that meant I had been forgiven. Now I understand that sometimes people smile because they are too tired to begin another argument. She made herself beautiful, but I rarely looked. No amount of perfume or makeup could compete with the excitement I found at work. There was always another young woman who admired me, another secret message, another hotel room, another opportunity to feel desired without having to face the damage that desire caused. I loved the thrill of forbidden things more than the quiet safety of true love. Constancy became invisible to me. Loyalty became ordinary. Elizabeth stayed, so I stopped understanding what staying cost her. Today, I drove into town. I did not go to the office. My telephone rang several times while I was driving, but I ignored it. I parked near the department store where Elizabeth used to shop. Inside, the lights were bright and soft music played from hidden speakers. Women stood near glass counters, testing makeup on the backs of their hands. I had no idea what to buy. I asked one of the assistants for help. She was young enough to be one of my trainees. Normally, I might have noticed her figure, her smile, or the way she leaned closer when speaking. Today, I saw only a person trying to help me choose something for my wife. "What shades does she wear?" the assistant asked. I realized I did not know. For 35 years, I had kissed Elizabeth's lips without remembering the color she placed on them. I described her skin and hair as best I could. The assistant selected a deep red lipstick. Then I bought powder, blush, mascara, perfume, and nail polish from the brands Elizabeth preferred. I knew the brands because the bottles and containers had filled our bathroom for years. At the counter, the assistant smiled. "Special occasion?" I looked down at the bag. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded strange, a very special one. When I returned home, the telephone was ringing. It continued for a long time. I did not answer. When Elizabeth used to call me during the day, I rarely picked up. If I saw her name on the screen, I assumed the reason could wait. Perhaps she wanted to ask what time I would be home. Perhaps she needed me to collect groceries. Perhaps she felt lonely. Work always seemed more urgent. Today, I allowed the telephone to ring until it stopped. Everyone who truly mattered in my life was already in the room with me. The office could survive without me. Clients could wait. Loans could remain unsigned. The company would continue making money, whether I answered or not. For the first time, I did not care. I brought a chair beside Elizabeth and opened the shopping bag. I placed a towel beneath her hands. Then I began painting her fingernails. I had never done it before. The first nail was uneven. I wiped away the extra polish and tried again. Slowly, each fingernail became a deep, shining red. Her hands had changed over the years. When we met, they had been soft and full of life. Later, those hands held our babies. They cleaned wounds, packed school lunches, folded clothes, washed dishes, and carried groceries. They rubbed my shoulders when I complained about stress. They signed birthday cards for both of us because I never remembered. Those hands had done more to hold our family together than all the money I had earned. I finished the final nail and waited for the polish to dry. "You always had beautiful hands," I told her. I could not remember whether I had ever said that before. Then I applied her makeup. I moved carefully. Powder first, a little blush. Mascara, the process was more difficult than I expected. My hands were not made for delicate work. They were used to signing contracts, shaking hands, and pointing toward numbers on documents. I was afraid of making her look foolish. She deserved better. I applied the red lipstick last. It made her face look warmer, more familiar. For a moment, I saw the young woman from the lecture hall again. The woman who asked intelligent questions and carried dreams in a blue notebook. I wondered where that notebook had gone. I wondered when she stopped writing in it. Perhaps it was still somewhere in the house, hidden beneath old photographs and school papers. Perhaps she had thrown it away years ago. I sprayed perfume lightly onto her neck and behind her ears. The familiar scent filled the room. For decades, I had smelled it on pillows, coats, and scarves without thinking about what it meant. Now it seemed to fill every empty part of the house. I sat beside her. "I am sorry," I said. The words felt too small. Elizabeth had apologized to me many times over the years for things that were not her fault. Dinner was late. The children were noisy. The house was untidy. She was too tired. She had forgotten something unimportant. I rarely apologized. When I did, I usually added an explanation. I was under pressure. The company needed me. The client was important. I had too much to drink. I did not mean for the affair to happen. Today, I gave her no explanation. "I am sorry." I waited. She did not answer. I told her I should have listened. I told her I remembered the bookshop she had once wanted to open. I told her I should have encouraged her to return to teaching. I told her I knew about the loneliness, even if I had spent years pretending not to see it. I confessed that I had been unfaithful. Not once, not twice, many times. I did not know whether she had known. "I thought coming home was enough," I whispered. "I thought paying for everything meant I was taking care of you." The house remained silent. I was wrong. I took her hand in mine. Her red nails looked beautiful. "I loved you," I said. Then I corrected myself. "I love you." Perhaps that was true. Perhaps I had loved her in the weak, selfish way people love things they assume will always remain available. I loved the home she created. I loved the children she raised. I loved knowing someone was waiting for me. I loved her usefulness, loyalty, patience, and forgiveness. I do not know how often I loved Elizabeth herself. That realization hurt more than I expected. The telephone rang again. This time I switched it off. Sunlight moved slowly across the living room floor. Dust drifted through the bright space. The clock continued ticking. For years I had measured my days in meetings, appointments, markets, and deadlines. Today I measured time in the small changes of light across my wife's face. The doorbell rang shortly after noon. I knew who it was. Still, I remained seated for several seconds. I wanted more time. That was almost funny. Elizabeth had asked me for time throughout our marriage. An evening. A weekend. A holiday without telephone calls. Breakfast without the newspaper. A conversation in which I actually listened. I always told her there would be time later. Now I wanted later more than anything. The bell rang again. I stood. Before opening the door, I returned to her side. I kissed her lips. The new lipstick left a small red mark on mine. She did not kiss me back. She could not. The undertaker waited outside. He wore a dark suit and spoke quietly. Another man stood behind him beside a long vehicle parked near the house. They entered with professional expressions and gentle voices. One of them asked whether I needed another moment. I almost laughed. Another moment. What could I do with another moment that I had failed to do in 35 years? Still, I nodded. They waited in the hallway. I returned to Elizabeth. She sat exactly where I had placed her that morning. Her coffee remained untouched. The soft, boiled eggs had grown cold hours ago. Her face was peaceful beneath the makeup. She looked more beautiful than she had in years. Or perhaps I was simply looking properly for the first time. I touched her hair. "I'm here now," I said. The sentence sounded cruel. She had needed me yesterday. Last week, 10 years earlier. She had needed me while she was alive. Being present now did nothing for her. The undertakers entered the room. They moved with great care. One supported her head while the other lifted her body. The blanket slipped slightly, and I saw the pale dress beneath it. It was the dress she had worn to our daughter's wedding. Elizabeth had chosen it herself. She told me that day that she felt beautiful. I had been too busy speaking to a client on the telephone to answer. The men placed her onto the stretcher. I followed them to the front door. For a moment, I wanted to tell them to stop. This was her house, her kitchen, her chair. Her perfume remained in the air. Every room carried evidence of her life. Taking her away felt like theft, but she was already gone. The body was only the final thing she had left behind. They carried her outside. The afternoon was cold but bright. A neighbor across the street watched from behind a curtain. The undertakers placed Elizabeth inside the vehicle and closed the doors. One of them offered his condolences. I nodded. Then they drove away. I remained on the front step until the vehicle disappeared. When I returned inside, the house had changed. Nothing looked different. The furniture was in place. The floors were clean. Photographs remained along the walls. But the structure had lost whatever held it together. Elizabeth had been the glue connecting every part of my life. She remembered what I forgot. She softened the harm I caused. She kept the children close after they left home. She turned money into meals, rooms, holidays, gifts, and memories. I had believed I created our life because I paid for it. Now I understood that I had only financed the materials. Elizabeth had built everything else. Without her, the house was only 2 stories filled with objects. My company called again after I switched the telephone on. There had been an important meeting. Several clients were waiting. A trainee had asked where I was. For the first time, none of it mattered. I walked into the kitchen. Her coffee was still on the table. A thin layer had formed across the surface. I sat in her chair. From there, I could see the room as she had seen it every morning. My newspaper blocking my face, my eyes on the clock, my body already leaning toward the door. I imagined her trying to decide whether something she wanted to say was important enough to delay me. Most mornings, she must have decided it was not. The radio began playing our song again. I do not know whether it was coincidence or whether the station repeated old songs at the same time each day. I stood alone in the kitchen. Then I began to dance. Slowly, awkwardly, I held one hand in the air where hers should have been and placed the other against an invisible waist. The saucepan did not boil over. No one laughed. There was no young woman smiling into my chest. Only an old man moving across a spotless floor while a song reminded him that time had never been waiting. When the music ended, I returned to the table. Elizabeth's chair was empty. For 35 years, she had held my life together so quietly that I had mistaken her effort for the natural order of things. Now she was gone. Nothing held it together anymore. Story 3. I first noticed something changing in him about 2 months ago. For a little background, I am 27 and my boyfriend was 28. We had been together for almost 2 years. Until recently, our relationship had been wonderful. We rarely argued, trusted each other, and had already started talking seriously about marriage. He had mentioned proposing more than once. We discussed where we might live, whether we wanted children, and even what names we liked. I truly believed I had found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. Then we went camping in New Mexico. It was his idea. He wanted to spend 2 nights in the desert stargazing and hiking through the wilderness. He had recently bought an expensive telescope and kept talking about how clear the sky would be once we got far away from the lights of the nearest towns. I was against the idea from the beginning. I had very little outdoor experience. I did not trust my navigation skills, and I knew almost nothing about surviving in the desert. I worried about getting lost, running out of water, encountering wild animals, or damaging the car somewhere without phone service. When I explained my concerns, my boyfriend laughed. He told me it was only my anxiety speaking, and that I should not give in to what he called my womanly hysterics. I still do not know exactly what he meant by that. It was rude and unlike him. He had never spoken to me that way before. When I became angry, he apologized and promised that everything would be fine. He said he had researched the area, brought the right supplies, and knew what he was doing. "We're going to have a great time," he insisted. The date of the trip arrived, and I prepared reluctantly. I packed extra food, water, blankets, batteries, medicine, and a small first aid kit. I also downloaded maps to my phone in case we lost reception. During the long drive, my fears slowly faded. The desert scenery was beautiful. The landscape seemed to stretch forever beneath the wide blue sky. Red and brown rocks rose from the ground in strange formations, while mountains remained visible on the distant horizon. The farther we traveled, the quieter the world became. I began feeling excited. My boyfriend used a light pollution map to find the darkest possible area. Instead of reserving a place at an official campsite, he chose a remote location reached through several dirt roads. I asked him again whether that was a good idea. He said proper campgrounds were expensive, crowded, and filled with noisy families. According to him, staying alone would give us the maximum nighttime experience. The phrase sounded ridiculous, but he seemed so excited that I agreed. Our car was not designed for rough terrain. It was an ordinary sedan, although my boyfriend had fitted it with off-road tires. We drove slowly over rocks and deep tracks, trying to avoid getting stuck. There was no phone signal. That made me nervous, but my boyfriend seemed completely unconcerned. He drove as though getting stranded in the middle of nowhere was impossible. His lack of caution bothered me, but I had no reason to believe anything truly strange was happening. Eventually, we found a wide, open area surrounded by low bushes and dry weeds. Several flat-topped rock formations stood in the distance. Beyond them, mountains formed a dark line along the horizon. The ground was mostly sand and stone. We pitched our tent near the car. My boyfriend began setting up the telescope while I prepared food. The first day was peaceful. We walked around the area, took photographs, and watched the sky change color as the sun went down. That night, the stars were brighter than anything I had ever seen. There were so many that the sky almost looked white. My boyfriend showed me planets, distant stars, and cloudy parts of the Milky Way through his telescope. For several hours, I forgot how isolated we were. The second day passed without any problems too. We hiked in the morning, rested during the hottest part of the afternoon, and spent the evening preparing for another night of stargazing. Nothing unusual happened until our final night. We remained outside until around 1 in the morning. After packing away some of the equipment, we entered the tent and went to sleep. I do not know how long I was asleep before the sound woke me. At first, I thought it was an animal. It was a long, painful cry, somewhere between a scream and a howl. I remained still, listening. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then it came again. This time, I was fully awake. The sound seemed closer. I reached towards my boyfriend's side of the tent. His sleeping bag was empty. I sat up immediately. I whispered his name, but there was no answer. My mind filled with terrible possibilities. Maybe he had heard the noise and gone outside. Maybe an animal had attacked him. Maybe he had fallen or become lost in the dark. I reached for the lantern. Before I could switch it on, the tent zipper began moving. It opened slowly from top to bottom. I froze. Someone or something was standing outside. The opening widened. My boyfriend's head appeared first, followed by the rest of his body. I released the breath I had been holding. "Where the hell were you?" I whispered. He crawled into the tent and closed the zipper behind him. I had to take a leak. "What was that screaming?" He shrugged. "Probably a bobcat." Then I noticed something dark on his leg. I switched on the lantern and moved closer. It was blood. The moment I leaned towards him, I noticed the smell. He smelled terrible. There was the strong scent of iron and urine, mixed with something else I could not identify. It was warm, sour, and almost rotten. "What happened to your leg?" He looked down as though he had only just noticed the blood. "Oh, that I probably cut myself on one of those thorn bushes. Was that why you screamed?" His face changed. He looked genuinely confused. "I didn't scream. I heard something outside twice." "You were probably dreaming. I was awake." He gave me a tired, irritated look. "Get some sleep." The lantern light reflected strangely in his eyes. They looked glassy, almost like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. A chill moved through me. I knew it was probably irrational, but I no longer wanted to sleep beside him. "Would you mind if I slept in the car?" His expression became annoyed. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Then he shrugged. "Do whatever you want." I grabbed a blanket, left the tent, and locked myself inside the sedan. Sleeping across the back seat was extremely uncomfortable, but I felt safer with metal doors around me. When I woke, the sun was already high. My neck and back hurt from the position I had slept in. My boyfriend was sitting outside in a folding chair, drinking a beer. It was still early in the morning, yet he wore dark sunglasses. I climbed out of the car and looked around. Nothing had been packed. "Aren't you going to help take the tent down?" He stared at me without answering. "Are we still leaving today?" He suddenly made a strange sound, as though he had forgotten the plan. Then he threw his half-finished beer into the bushes. I stared at him. My boyfriend never littered. He hated littering more than almost anything. He complained whenever he saw rubbish on hiking trails, beaches, or public roads. Once, he followed someone across a parking lot to return a cup they had dropped beside their car. "Did you seriously just throw that there?" I asked. He looked towards the bushes. "You hate people who litter." "Right." He stood, walked over, and picked up the can. There was no embarrassment in his voice, no joke, no explanation. It was as though he had forgotten something about himself and needed me to remind him. We packed the campsite in silence. When we began driving, he behaved as if he had never controlled a car before. He pressed the accelerator too hard, then suddenly hit the brakes. The sedan moved from one side of the dirt road to the other. His hands seemed uncertain on the steering wheel. "What are you doing?" I asked. "The road is rough." He eventually found a steady speed and we reached the highway. Not long afterwards, a large coyote ran in front of the car. There was no time to stop. The impact was violent. The front of the car struck the animal, and the whole vehicle shook. We moved towards the shoulder before my boyfriend regained control. The bonnet and front bumper were badly damaged. Both of us were thrown against our seatbelts. My shoulder hurt and I felt dizzy, but I did not think I was seriously injured. "We need to call someone," I said. "Maybe an ambulance." My boyfriend turned towards me. The terror on his face was unlike anything I had ever seen. His eyes became wide, and his mouth opened slightly. "No, we were just in an accident. I can drive. You might be hurt. Do not call anyone." His voice was firm, almost desperate. He begged me not to contact the police, an ambulance, or even roadside assistance. He promised that he would visit a doctor once we returned home. I was confused and still shaken from the crash. Instead of arguing, I agreed. I wish I had not. I have replayed that moment in my head many times. If I had called for help, perhaps someone would have examined him. Maybe a doctor would have discovered what was wrong. Maybe everything that happened later could have been prevented. When we returned home, he said he had gone to urgent care. According to him, the doctor found several bruises and one cracked rib. He claimed he had received painkillers and instructions to rest. I never saw any paperwork. There was no hospital bill, receipt, or payment listed on our bank account. When I asked about it, he said he had thrown away the medical documents. It was a convenient explanation. His behavior became stranger during the following week. Some of the changes were so small that a stranger would never have noticed them. I noticed because I knew him. My boyfriend had always gone to bed early. Even on weekends, he rarely remained awake past midnight. After the camping trip, he barely seemed to sleep. I would wake during the night and find him sitting on the edge of the bed. Sometimes he stared at the wall. Other times he stared at me. He did not look at me with love or affection. He studied me. His expression was thoughtful and cold, like a predator deciding whether something was worth attacking. Whenever I asked what he was doing, he claimed he could not sleep. One morning I entered the bathroom without knocking. He was standing in front of the mirror, pulling at the skin on his neck. His fingers stretched it away from his throat as though he were testing how firmly it was attached. His face looked unusually pale. Beneath the skin of his neck I could see the bones shifting. The movement did not look natural. He quickly released the skin when he saw me. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing." His hygiene also became worse. Before the trip, he showered every day. He cared about his appearance and always smelled of the same expensive soap. Afterwards, he constantly smelled bad. His skin looked oily and wet. Dark gray pieces collected around his shoulders, neck, and back. They resembled layers of dead skin that had not been washed away for weeks. When I confronted him, he blamed his construction job. He said the summer heat made him sweat more than usual and that he was too tired to scrub properly after work. I tried to believe him. Stress could make someone neglect themselves. But every day, it became worse. His hair started falling out. The hair that remained looked wild and dirty. almost like the coat of a neglected animal. Eventually, I asked him to sleep on the couch. I told him it was because I needed space. The truth was that I had become afraid to sleep beside him. His personality had changed too. The gentle man I loved seemed to be disappearing. He stopped using the names we had created for each other. He forgot private jokes and memories from our relationship. It felt as though someone else had taken his place without receiving all the information necessary to imitate him. He stopped meeting his friends. He rarely left the apartment except for work. When he spoke, his sentences became shorter and less natural. Sometimes he answered with grunts. Other times, the words came out in broken pieces, like a parrot or crow copying human speech. The worst moment came on our anniversary. It was our second year together. For months, he had hinted that he might propose. I believed our anniversary was the most likely day. I spent the entire evening waiting. I watched him carefully, expecting him to suddenly produce a ring or suggest going somewhere special. He did nothing. We ate an ordinary meal. He watched television. Then he stood and said he was going to sleep. I could not hold back my tears. "You forgot, didn't you?" He looked at me. Forgot what? That answer confirmed everything. He had no idea what day it was. I packed a small bag and spent the night with a friend. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I felt exhausted, embarrassed, and completely broken. That evening, he appeared with flowers and a gift card. The flowers were tulips. I am allergic to tulips. My boyfriend knew that. He had known since our first month together. I stood in the doorway, staring at the flowers. Fear replaced my sadness. Who was standing inside my home? It looked like my boyfriend and wore his clothes, but it could not truly be him. And if it was not him, where was the man I loved? That was when I stopped believing this was only a relationship problem. I searched online for couples counseling and advice about sudden personality changes. I typed lists of his symptoms into Google. Eventually, I found a Reddit story about skinwalkers. The name caught my attention. I spent hours reading posts, comments, legends, and alleged encounters. The more I read, the worse I felt. People described creatures that copied humans and animals. They wore familiar appearances but failed to imitate small behaviors. They forgot memories, moved strangely, and spoke in broken voices. Some stories claimed their eyes looked unnatural in reflected light. Others mentioned terrible smells, rotting skin, and dead animals. Every new detail seemed to fit. I knew these were only internet stories. I wanted desperately to believe none of them were real. But I could no longer ignore the changes in the person living with me. I started keeping a diary. I wrote down everything he did. When he slept, what he ate, the words he used, things he remembered and things he forgot. I recorded every unusual movement and habit. One day I saw him writing with his right hand. Before the trip he could use both hands, but he always preferred his left. It was a tiny detail. Still, I added it to the diary. Then the dead animals appeared. The first was a squirrel outside our door. Its body had been torn apart, and blood covered the concrete. I assumed the neighbor's cat had brought it there. I asked my boyfriend to remove it. He did so reluctantly. A few days later, I found a dead rat inside the kitchen rubbish bin. Its body was badly damaged. Part of it appeared to have been eaten. I did not ask him about it. By then, I feared that confronting him might cause him to attack me. Another rat appeared on the porch. I spoke to the neighbor and asked whether her cat had been hunting around our half of the duplex. She apologized and promised to keep the cat indoors more often. I wanted to accept that explanation. Then the cat died. I found it one morning when I went outside to collect the mail. Its body was lying directly in front of our porch. The stomach had been cut open. The organs had been pulled out and spread across the steps. Several crows were pecking at the remains. The cat must have been there for hours. My boyfriend had left the bedroom during the night. When I asked where he was going, he said he needed to urinate. He had been gone for at least 20 minutes. I ran inside, crying and trying not to vomit. I knew he had done it. Not my real boyfriend. Whatever wore his face. The neighbor called the police. The officers suggested a group of troubled teenagers living nearby might have killed the cat as a cruel prank. They asked whether she wanted to press charges if anyone was identified. I did not think the officers believed their own explanation. The neighbor looked towards our half of the porch. Why would they leave it in front of her door? She asked, pointing towards me. And this isn't the first dead animal that has appeared here. The police questioned both of us. They found no evidence. I could not tell them that I suspected my boyfriend had been replaced by a skinwalker. They would have thought I was insane. Worse, they might have decided I was killing the animals myself. After the police visited, the carcasses stopped appearing. My friends started noticing how badly I was coping. They said I looked ill. I had lost weight, barely slept, and cried almost every day. When they asked what was happening, I told them we were having relationship problems. I refused to explain further. How could I? Sometimes, late at night, I heard tapping or scratching against the windows. I was too frightened to look. I imagined another skinwalker standing outside, waiting to kill me and copy my appearance. I feared the creature inside my home would murder me first. Everything finally reached its end last night. The evening began like the previous ones. I returned from work and ate a small snack. He came home later and sat in the living room. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and scrolled through social media while trying not to listen to the sounds outside. At around 11, I switched off the light. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. I cried until I began falling asleep. About 30 minutes later, the bedroom door slowly opened. I became completely awake. He entered the room. He had not come into my bedroom at night for more than a month. I knew this was it. Tonight, he was going to attack me. I was not prepared for what happened. He was completely naked. He stood with his back bent slightly, almost hunched. Then he climbed onto the bed and moved over me. I froze. I held my breath and hoped he would not do anything. His hand closed around my shoulder. I screamed. I punched him in the throat and pushed him away. He fell from the bed and struck the floor. A terrible wheezing noise escaped him. It sounded like an angry elk. I reached into the desk drawer and grabbed the knife I had hidden there. I had kept it close for exactly this moment. I pointed the blade towards him. He slowly stood. His face became pale. His small, shifting eyes stared at me with fear. He looked like a trapped animal that had suddenly realized it had nowhere to escape. I do not remember every word we exchanged. Everything happened too quickly. He begged me to stop. He told me he was my boyfriend. He claimed he was not trying to kill me. He said he only wanted to be close to me again. He said I was acting irrationally. He said I was making a terrible mistake. But it was too late. The creature had already revealed itself. Nothing it said could convince me that it was human. My real boyfriend was gone. This thing had taken his body and his life. I decided it would pay for what it had done. I lunged towards him. I stabbed him. I do not know how many times. There was blood everywhere. He fought back and tried to stop me. He was stronger than I expected, but his injuries slowly weakened him. Eventually, he stopped moving. I remember opening his stomach the way the neighbor's cat had been opened. I told myself the creature deserved it. Then I began cutting into the skin. I pulled one section away from the body. I expected to find something beneath it. Black fur, different muscles, an animal's face, some impossible creature hiding beneath the human shape. Instead, the skin remained connected to ordinary tissue. Human muscle, human blood, human fat. I kept searching. I cut deeper. I examined the organs beneath the ribs and stomach. There was nothing else inside. No second body. No hidden creature. No sign that anything had been wearing him. There was only my boyfriend. His normal body. His human body. I stepped backwards. The adrenaline began fading. I looked at what I had done and vomited on the floor. There had never been a skinwalker. He had not been replaced. The camping trip, the accident, the pain, stress, poor hygiene, forgotten anniversary, and strange behavior had all become connected inside my frightened mind. I had turned every mistake into evidence. Every change became proof. Every dead animal became part of the same story. He had tried to tell me the truth. He had only wanted to be intimate with his girlfriend after weeks of sleeping apart. And I killed him. I murdered the man I planned to marry. It was not a monster pretending to be him. It was him the entire time. I thought my boyfriend was a skinwalker. Story 4. Many centuries ago, in a wealthy region surrounded by thick forests and cold mountains, there lived a man named Johann Bernhold. The Bernhold family was one of the oldest and most powerful families in the area. Their bloodline included knights, scholars, judges, military commanders, and advisors to kings. Their family name was carved into church walls, written in history books, and spoken with respect in noble courts. The Bernholts owned more land than most villagers could imagine. They controlled farms, forests, mills, and several important roads. Their large stone estates stood on a hill above the nearest town, allowing them to look down on everyone who lived below. Johann's father, Lord Gerhard Bernhold, believed his family had been chosen by God to rule. He saw wealth and power as proof of divine approval. In his mind, poor people were poor because they were weak, while the Bernholts were rich because they deserved to be. Johann's birth only made Gerhard more certain of his family's greatness. According to the servants who were present that night, Johann did not enter the world crying like an ordinary baby. He burst from his mother's body with a roar so powerful that the windows shook in their frames. Dogs began barking in the courtyard. Horses kicked against their stable doors. Birds sleeping in the nearby trees flew into the darkness. Even wolves in the distant forest answered with long howls. The midwife nearly dropped the child when she saw his face. Johann had been born with features that looked more like those of a lion than a human being. His nose was wide and flat across the bridge. His eyes were sharp, golden, and strangely focused for a newborn. His jaw was large, and when he opened his mouth, it stretched much wider than a human mouth should have been able to. Inside were small, pointed teeth. His mother, Lady Isolde, screamed when the child was placed in her arms. She called him a demon. She begged the servants to take him away and burn him before he brought destruction upon the family. She claimed she had dreamed of a lion standing over her bed during the pregnancy. In the dream, its mouth had been filled with human fingers, and blood had covered its golden fur. No one listened to her. Lord Gerhardt saw his son differently. He did not see a curse, he saw strength. The lion is the king of beasts, he declared. My son has been marked for greatness. Lady Isolde died before sunrise. Some said she had lost too much blood during the birth. Others said terror had stopped her heart. The servants who had heard her final words claimed she continued whispering the same warning until her last breath. Do not let him grow. Gerhardt ordered everyone in the household never to repeat those words. Johann was raised with every advantage that money could buy. The finest tutors traveled from distant cities to teach him. He learned philosophy, mathematics, history, law, literature, music, and several languages. He understood new ideas almost immediately. By the age of 10, he could read ancient books that confused men 3 times his age. By 12, he played several musical instruments with remarkable skill. By 15, he had defeated trained soldiers in wrestling, sword fighting, and archery. He was highly intelligent, highly athletic, and dangerously confident. People later called him a true Renaissance man, someone who could master almost anything he attempted. Yet no education could hide his face. As Johann grew older, his lion-like features became more noticeable. Thick golden brown hair surrounded his head and neck like a mane. His fingernails were unusually strong and ended in sharp points. His teeth grew long and white, filling his mouth like polished blades. His eyes frightened people most. They did not move like human eyes. When Johann entered a room, his gaze passed slowly across every person inside. He studied them the way a predator studied animals at the edge of a field. He noticed fear immediately and seemed to enjoy it. Babies cried whenever he came near. Dogs lowered their heads and refused to look at him. Horses often became impossible to control if he approached them too quickly. The villagers believed Lady Isolde had been right. They whispered that Johann was a demon wearing the shape of a man. Some said Gerhardt had made a deal with an evil spirit to produce a powerful heir. Others believed a beast from the forest had entered Isolde's room during the night and left something inside her. No one dared speak these rumors near the Bernholt estate. Lord Gerhardt protected his son with money, threats, and violence. If a priest questioned Johann's nature, Gerhardt donated enough gold to the church to silence him. If a farmer spread rumors, Gerhardt raised his rent or took his land. If a servant spoke too freely, that servant disappeared. Johann grew up watching his father control everyone around him. From Gerhardt, he learned that power could change the truth. If a rich man committed a crime, it could become a misunderstanding. If a nobleman desired something, taking it could be called a right. If someone weaker resisted, they could be punished until they agreed. Johann began believing that everyone below him existed to serve him. Villagers bowed when he passed, and he assumed they admired him. Servants avoided his eyes, and he believed that showed respect. Women stepped away from him, and he told himself they were overwhelmed by his presence. No one corrected him. The few who tried regretted it. For many years, there seemed to be no force strong enough to stop Johann or his family. Even the church treated the Bernholts carefully. Priests accepted their donations and offered public blessings, despite the rumors that followed them. Johann believed he was untouchable. Then he met Caterina Belandi. Caterina came from another powerful family, though the Belandis were respected for different reasons. They were merchants, diplomats, and landowners who had earned their wealth through trade instead of war. Katerina had been educated as carefully as any noble son. She could ride, read Latin, manage business accounts, and debate politics. She was quick-minded, direct, and impossible to frighten easily. She was also beautiful. Her hair was dark, her eyes were bright, and she carried herself with calm confidence. She did not lower her head when powerful men entered a room. She spoke clearly and expected others to listen. Johann first saw her at a gathering held in the home of a local duke. She stood near an open window, speaking with several guests. While other people watched Johann with nervous curiosity, Katerina only glanced at him once before returning to her conversation. That single glance became an obsession. Johann had spent his entire life surrounded by fear, false praise, and obedience. Katerina's lack of interest felt different. He mistook it for a challenge. During dinner, he sat across from her and watched her constantly. She noticed but refused to react. When he attempted to join her conversation, she answered him politely and then turned to someone else. Johann had never felt so ignored. By the end of the evening, he had convinced himself that Katerina secretly wanted him. He believed her distance was only a game. Over the following weeks, Johann arranged to appear wherever she went. He attended gatherings he had previously considered unimportant. He visited the church on the mornings when Katerina prayed with her family. He rode along the road she used and claimed their meetings were accidental. At first, Katerina remained polite. When he spoke to her, she answered briefly. When he sent flowers, she returned them. When he wrote letters, she left them unopened. Johann refused to understand. He began following her more openly. If she visited the market, he watched from nearby. If she went riding, he followed on another horse. If she attended dinner with friends, he waited outside until she left. Sometimes he appeared at her family home after sunset and demanded to speak with her. Katerina's father warned him to stay away. Johann laughed. He reminded the man that the Bernholt family controlled the roads used by Belandi merchants. The message was clear. If the family continued resisting him, he could damage their business. Katerina became angrier with every encounter. Johann interpreted that anger as passion. He wrote poems comparing her to a bird and himself to a lion. In the poems, the bird always returned willingly to the lion's cage. Katerina burned them. Johann sent expensive jewelry. She returned every piece. He sent a servant to ask what gift would finally please her. She told the servant that the only gift she wanted was Johann's absence. When Johann heard this, he became furious. But the anger soon changed into determination. He told himself Katerina had not rejected him. She was testing whether his love was strong enough. One autumn evening, Katerina left a family gathering and began walking home with a servant. The streets were quiet, and the last light of the day had disappeared behind the rooftops. Johann followed them. Katerina heard his footsteps almost immediately. She told her servant to continue home and inform her father that she would arrive shortly. The servant hesitated, but Katerina insisted. She had decided the situation needed to end. When the servant was gone, Katerina stopped beneath an old stone archway and turned around. Johann approached with a smile. He wore a dark cloak over an expensive red coat. His thick hair framed his face, and his golden eyes reflected the light of a nearby lantern. "Katerina," he said, "I knew you wished to speak with me alone. I did not ask you to follow me. You did not need to." "Yes, Johann, I did." His smile weakened. She stood straight and looked directly into his eyes. "You must leave me alone. Johann tilted his head. Why, my love? Is something wrong? Do not call me that. But you are my love. No, love is something shared between two people. I have no love for you, while you claim to give all of yours to me. That is not love. It is obsession. Johann's nostrils widened. Katerina continued before he could speak. I have been polite. I have returned your gifts. My family has warned you. Still, you follow me through the streets and appear outside my home at night. I am protecting you. I do not want your protection. You do not understand what you want. Katerina's eyes hardened. I understand perfectly. I want you to stay away from me. Johann took one slow step closer. Think carefully. I have thought carefully. You would refuse a man like me? Yes, a Bernholt? Yes. A man who could give you everything. You have nothing I want. Something changed in Johann's face. For most of his life, he had tried to control the animal features he had been born with. He trained himself to smile without showing too many teeth. He softened his voice and copied his father's proud, calm expressions. Now that human mask disappeared, his lips pulled back, revealing every sharp tooth. The muscles around his mouth twisted. His pupils narrowed until his eyes looked like those of a hunting animal. A low growl rose from his chest. You refuse a lion? He snarled. Katerina took one step back, but she did not run. Johann grabbed her wrist. His hand closed around it with terrible force. Katerina felt the bones pressing together beneath her skin. He pulled her close until her face was only inches from his open mouth. His breath smelled of meat and wine. Katerina was afraid. She knew she might die in that street. Still, she met his eyes. If refusing you means accepting death, she said, then I refuse you gladly. Johann roared. It was the same earth-shaking sound he had made at birth. The lantern flame went out. Windows rattled in nearby houses. Birds flew from the roofs, and horses cried inside their stables. Johann threw Katerina to the ground. She struck the stone road hard enough to lose her breath. Before she could rise, he dropped his full weight onto her and pinned her arms and legs beneath him. She screamed and fought. Johann opened his mouth. His jaw stretched far beyond its normal limit. The skin split at the corners, exposing teeth that looked like white knives. Then he bit into Katerina's face. He tore through flesh and bone as easily as wet cloth. Katerina's scream ended almost immediately. Johann continued long after she stopped moving. The next morning, the people of the town awoke to a terrible discovery. Katerina's body had been placed on top of the church steeple. No one understood how it had been carried so high. Her fine dress allowed her family to identify her, but her face was gone. Most of her skull had been removed, leaving only a broken bowl of bone holding part of her brain above her neck. The priest who climbed the tower vomited when he saw her. Katerina's father collapsed in the street. Johann attended the funeral. He stood far from the other mourners and watched her coffin with a calm expression. Dried blood remained beneath one of his fingernails, but no one dared accuse him. At least, not yet. After Katerina's death, other women began disappearing. The first was a young servant who left work after sunset. Her body was found beside the river 3 days later. Her face had been torn away. Then a merchant's daughter vanished while returning from a nearby village. Hunters found pieces of her clothing in the woods along with part of her hand. Another woman disappeared from her own garden. Then another. The victims were different ages and came from different families, but each had been attacked in the same way. If the woman had beautiful eyes, they were carefully removed. If she had a recognizable smile, her jaw and lips were torn from her face. It was as though the killer hated anything that allowed the women to be identified. Some villagers believed Johann was trying to rebuild Katarina's face from pieces of other women. Others thought he destroyed their faces because Katarina's rejection haunted him. Every woman reminded him of the one person who had refused to bow. People began closing their doors before sunset. Women stopped traveling alone. Fathers and brothers walked beside them through the streets carrying knives, clubs, and farming tools. Still, the deaths continued. Eventually, fear became stronger than the Bernholt family's power. People began speaking openly. What other beast could cause wounds like these? One farmer asked in the crowded town square, "I've seen less damage done to my sheep by a pack of wolves." Another answered. A hunter claimed he had seen Johann near the forest on the night of the latest killing. There was blood on his shirt, and he was walking on his hands and feet. A servant from the Bernholt estate confessed that Johann often returned home before dawn covered in mud. She had found pieces of women's jewelry hidden beneath his bed. Lord Gerhardt tried to silence the accusations. He offered money to the victims' families. When they refused, he threatened them. This time, no one backed down. Katarina's father stood outside the church and called Johann a murderer before the entire town. He demanded justice from the priest, the local guards, and any nobleman willing to listen. When none of them acted, the villagers decided to act for themselves. One moonless night, hundreds of people gathered with torches, ropes, axes, hunting spears, and swords. They marched toward the Bernholt estate. Johann heard them coming. For the first time in his life, he understood that his father's money could not protect him. He escaped through the back of the estate and ran toward the forest. The villagers followed. They chased him between the trees, guided by torchlight and the sound of his breathing. Leaves and branches broke beneath hundreds of feet. Their angry voices rose together. Some called Katarina's name. Others shouted the names of the women who had disappeared. Ahead of them, Johann growled. He no longer ran like a man. His body bent forward, and his hands struck the earth. With every hurried step, he became more animal. Long claws forced their way through his fingertips, splitting the skin. Rounded ears pushed from the sides of his head. His spine twisted, and thick hair spread across his shoulders and arms. The change did not look natural. It appeared as though a lion had been trapped inside his body since birth and was finally tearing its way out. Johann screamed as bones cracked and changed shape. The sound became a roar. The villagers continued chasing him. They drove him deeper into the forest, beyond the hunting paths and into a part of the woods where even experienced hunters rarely traveled. Back at the estate, Lord Gerhardt did nothing. He sat alone in his great hall and drank until he could no longer stand. He listened to the distant voices tracking his son and understood that his family's power had finally failed. For years he had protected Johann from every consequence. That night there was no amount of money large enough to save him. The villagers searched until sunrise. They never found Johann. In a clearing deep inside the forest, they discovered the bodies of several wolves and deer. Each animal had been torn open, and parts of them were missing. Johann's shredded clothes hung from low branches. His boots lay in the mud. A trail of blood led farther into the trees, then suddenly stopped. Like his victims, Johann Bernholt had simply disappeared. Some believed wild animals killed and ate him. Others believed he escaped across the mountains and died alone. The oldest villagers said the forest had accepted him because he had never truly been human. Years passed, and the Bernholt family lost its power. Lord Gerhardt died drunk and alone. The estate was abandoned, then damaged by fire. Katarina's family placed a stone monument near the church, though they could not restore the face that had been taken from her. The disappearances stopped. For a while, then travelers began reporting strange sounds in the forest. Hunters heard deep growling outside their camps at night. Some saw golden eyes watching from between the trees. Women traveling alone sometimes felt something following them, though no footprints appeared on the road. Every few years, someone vanished. The bodies that were found had no faces. The legend of the lion-faced man survived for generations. Parents warned their daughters to return home before dark. People hung iron crosses above their doors and carried salt when traveling through the woods. They said Johann was still alive. Perhaps the beast inside him had made him stronger than an ordinary man. Perhaps the forest had changed him completely. Perhaps demons did not age as humans did. According to the stories, he remained hidden during the day and hunted at night. He waited for women walking alone, especially those who reminded him of Katarina. People said he hated brave women most. Whenever one refused to fear him, he heard Katarina's voice again. Even now, if you enter those woods after sunset and sit quietly, you may hear his growl moving between the trees. Do not answer if he calls your name. Do not run if you see golden eyes. Running only tells the lion that you are prey. My family has remembered the story longer than anyone else. Katarina Belandi was my ancestor's sister. Before she died, she left behind letters describing Johann's behavior. In them, she wrote about his unwanted gifts, his threats, and the way he followed her at night. The final letter ended with a promise. She wrote that she would confront him and force him to understand that she did not belong to him. For centuries, my family preserved those letters. We also preserved something else. A piece of Johann's torn red coat was found in the forest after he vanished. It was stained with his blood. My ancestors kept it sealed inside a silver box, hoping it might one day help someone recognize or kill him. I have read every record. I have studied the old forest paths. I know where the bodies were found and where Johann's trail disappeared. Last winter, I went into those woods alone. Near the clearing, I found a tree marked with deep claw cuts. They were fresh. Beside it lay the face of a missing woman. The legend is true. Johann Bernholt is still alive. He is no longer only a man with the face of a lion. Whatever humanity he once possessed has been gone for centuries. He is waiting. He lives for the day he can come out of the forest and begin slaughtering women again. When that day arrives, I will be ready. Not for glory, not for my family's name, for Katarina. Story 5. It is almost time, Mother, I whispered to her grave. I did not speak quietly because I was afraid someone might hear me. I spoke the way a person shares a secret with someone they love, leaning close because the words are meant only for them. It was the kind of secret that would make the listener smile with excitement. But it was not truly a secret. I had told Mother the same thing many times. In fact, I had visited her grave almost every day since the sickness took her from us. I told her about Father, the empty village, the orchard, and the festival. I reminded her that we were waiting for her, and that one day she would come home again. But on that gray and miserable morning, The words carried more meaning than ever before. After years of waiting, the festival was finally happening that night. I could hardly control my excitement. I imagined my voice pushing through the 6 feet of soil beneath my knees. It would pass between stones and roots, then slip through the wooden lid of Mother's coffin. Her ears would hear me, even though her mouth could no longer answer. That was enough for me. I did not expect a response. The hope in my voice and the knowledge that she had heard me were more than I needed. Still, something answered. It was not a voice. I heard no words from beneath the ground. The dead soil did not move, and the grave remained silent. Instead, I felt something on my left cheek. It was a gentle touch, so light that I almost mistook it for the cold morning wind. But then I felt the shape of fingers and the slow movement of a thumb beneath my eye. It was Mother's hand. The touch felt like a distant memory of the way she used to comfort me. Whenever I cried, she would cup my face and wipe away a single tear with her thumb. This time, the tear remained. Perhaps the hand was not strong enough to remove it. Perhaps the dead could offer comfort but could no longer change the living world. The tear rolled down my cheek and fell onto the loose soil covering her grave. I smiled. "I knew you were listening," I whispered. I remained there for another moment, both knees and palms pressed into the dirt. When I finally stood, my dress was stained, and mud clung beneath my fingernails. I did not care. The weight inside my chest had become lighter. I walked out of the graveyard with a spring in my step. As I passed the rows of tombstones, I smiled at them as though they were rabbits watching me from beneath the bushes. Soon, many of those graves would be empty. Back from the grave, I see. "Little one?" Father called when I entered the house. He was sitting at our long wooden table, preparing for the evening. Clean cloths had been arranged in neat piles. Needles, scissors, tweezers, and knives covered the table. Father had spent most of the morning washing, repairing, and sharpening them. A deep look of concentration covered his face. Beneath it was a quiet stress that he could not completely hide. He knew how much the festival meant to me. Everything had to be perfect. "Yes, Father," I replied. I spoke to Mother again. He nodded as if he had already known. Anyone could have guessed where I had been. "And how was she?" he asked. "Did you tell her about tonight?" I told her it was almost time. I have said it before, but this time I truly meant it. I said it with my whole heart. I felt something this time," I continued. "I really did." Her hand touched my cheek. It felt exactly like it used to before. My voice stopped. It often happened when I spoke about Mother's sickness. The words became trapped behind the painful lump in my throat. Father stopped cleaning the scalpel in his hands. He placed it carefully on the cloth and stood. For a moment, I thought he might come closer and hug me. His arms were still large from years of farm work, even though the rest of his body had become weak. He remained several feet away. We had learned to keep distance from one another. It was safer that way. "I believe you, little one," he said. He took a deep, difficult breath. The dead become more restless as the festival approaches. They are just like you. They cannot wait. A small smile appeared on my face. I sniffed and wiped my nose against my sleeve. "Thank you, Father." He returned to the table and lifted the scalpel. "I can finish the preparations here," he said. "Why do you not go to the orchard and see whether any apples remain? Your mother always loved the ones you picked." I wanted to protest. I could see how much effort the work demanded from him. His hands shook as he held the small blade. Sweat covered his pale forehead, even though the house was cold. The sickness was moving through him. It had already taken Mother. Now it was slowly taking Father, too. The sickness was an invisible demon that wandered through the village day and night. It was always hungry. It wanted more bodies, no matter how many it had already consumed. Mother had not been enough. The kind baker and his wife were not enough. Neither were their 2 sons. The blacksmith and his family had been taken. His daughter and I used to play together when we were younger, but we had slowly grown apart after the sickness arrived. Everyone had grown apart. Families locked their doors. Friends stopped visiting. People crossed the street to avoid one another. Even those who were healthy feared that the demon might already be hiding inside them. The sickness kept us alone and frightened. Then, one by one, it took us. "But, Father, I want to help," I said. "Surely you cannot do all of this alone." "I will be fine, little one. I am stronger than these wrinkles make me appear." He forced a laugh. But I was not looking at his wrinkles. I was staring at the lump on his neck. It had grown quickly over the past several days. At first, it had looked like a small spot beneath his skin, almost like an ordinary pimple. Now it was a large, swollen mass. Its surface had turned a yellowish color like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I imagined it as a fat tick buried inside his throat. It drank his blood and strength, growing larger while he became thinner. Father noticed where I was looking. His smile disappeared. "Go, little one," he said quietly. "Please," his voice broke. "I do not want you to watch this happen to me." "Oh, okay, Father." I backed toward the door. "Stay safe. I love you." "I love you too." When I stepped outside, the excitement that had carried me home from the graveyard was gone. The apple trees moved wildly in the late autumn wind. Their thin branches shook as if they were pretending to be alive. But they could not fool anyone, especially not me. Most of their leaves had fallen. The few that remained were brown, dry, and curled against the branches like dead insects. Rotten apples covered the ground. Their soft orange flesh had split open. Slugs and worms moved through the exposed fruit, eating what the villagers had left behind. Several apples were covered in pale mold. Perhaps the demon had touched them too. Arthur had been the first orchard worker to become sick. Mother had spoken to him often at the market. I used to call him the Apple Man, although he was the one responsible for most of the orchard. After the lumps appeared on his body, the sickness moved quickly through the other workers. Within weeks, there was no one left to care for the trees. At first, the orchard remained empty. Then, the sickness spread through the village, and frightened families came in groups to take whatever apples remained. They filled baskets, sacks, and pockets before locking themselves inside their homes. They believed the food might help them survive until the demon went away. It never went away. Before the sickness arrived, Mother often brought me to the orchard. Her work kept her busy. She was a midwife and also examined women who were ill or expecting children. She rarely had an entire afternoon free, but when she did, we came here. The memory returned as I walked between the dying trees. "Here, Mother, try this one." It had been the last time we visited the orchard together. Spring had covered everything in green. Sunlight passed through the leaves, and the branches were heavy with bright red apples. I had found what I believed was the most perfect apple in the entire orchard. It was round, red, and smooth. I held it above my head as though I were presenting a rare jewel to a queen. "It looks wonderful, darling," Mother said. "But before I taste it, I want to show you something." She took my hand and led me between the rows of trees. The warm sun made every color brighter. The leaves shone. The apples looked like small red lanterns hanging among them. Mother stopped beside one unusual tree. Its bark was pale gray instead of brown. Its branches were dry and stiff, reaching toward the sky like the fingers of a corpse. "This tree is dead, Mother," I said. "Yes, Sarah, it is, but look closely at its left side. Tell me what you see." I studied the tree as though I were performing a serious examination. My eyes moved along every branch, searching. Then I found it. A single apple hung from one of the dead limbs. It was redder and brighter than the apple in my hands. Its skin shone beneath the sunlight. There were no dark spots, holes, or signs of decay. "But how?" I asked. "How did an apple grow on a dead tree?" "I do not know, little bird," Mother replied. "Perhaps the tree has a rare condition. Perhaps it is a miracle." She laughed and gently shook my shoulders. "I think it is a lesson." Mother stepped forward and plucked the apple from the dead branch. She turned it slowly in her hands. "This tree is telling us to live even when death surrounds us," she said. "It must have spent weeks or months growing this apple while the rest of it was dying." She placed the fruit in my hands. "It continued to grow for the orchard. Perhaps it grew for us. Perhaps it even grew for you." Mother smiled. "I do not speak the language of trees, little bird, but I would like to believe this tree. And I share the same wish." "What wish?" "That you continue to grow and live fully before you no longer can." She ruffled my hair. "Go on, Sarah, take a bite." I returned to that same tree now. It had not changed. Its trunk remained pale and dry. Its branches still looked like dead fingers reaching toward the sky. But once again, a single apple hung from one of them. It was perfectly round and a deep, brilliant red. The sight made me stop. For a moment, it felt as though the memory were happening again. The sickness had vanished. Mother was alive. The orchard was green. I reached up and gently removed the apple. "Perhaps you were never dead at all," I whispered to the tree. By evening, I was lying on the large oak table in our home. Only a few minutes remained before the festival began. My excited heartbeat counted down the time like a war drum. Blood rushed through my veins and my body twisted restlessly against the table. I held the apple tightly in my sweaty hands. A sudden worry entered my mind. My palms had made the apple wet. What if the taste was ruined? What if it had lost some of its color? "No," I told myself. "She will still love it." "Of course she will, little one," Father said. I had not realized I had spoken aloud. He sat beside me on a chair, checking the tools one final time. The lumps on his neck appeared yellow beneath the fading light. They looked like egg yolks stuck beneath his skin. Guilt filled me. Perhaps I should not have gone to the orchard. Perhaps I should have remained and helped him. Father would tell me not to feel guilty. He would say he had sent me away because he wanted the apple as much as I did. He checked the cloths. They were as clean as we could make them. He tested the tweezers, opening and closing them several times. He ran his finger close to the edge of each scalpel without touching it. Everything was ready. Now, we could only wait. The sunlight disappeared. Father lit the candles around the room. Their small flames offered the only warmth. A cold wind entered the house. At first, it passed through the cracks around the windows and doors. Then it grew stronger. moving through the rooms like the beginning of a storm. The windows rattled, furniture shook, goosebumps covered my skin. The candle flames bent almost sideways, but none went out. No plates fell from the shelves. No cups rolled from the table. The wind was violent, but strangely careful. Then the cold disappeared. It felt as though someone had placed a warm blanket over Father and me. The wind continued roaring around us, but we no longer felt its bite. That was how I knew the festival had begun. A sound rose beyond the house. At first, it seemed like distant drums. The sound came closer. It was not drumming. It was wetter and more natural, like hundreds of hands slowly clapping. Closer still. Then I understood. Footsteps. The dead had risen. They were marching through the village. The front door shook with 3 loud knocks. Each knock came slowly, with a long pause between them, as if the person outside were carefully deciding whether to strike again. A tear moved down my left cheek. "Mother is home," I whispered. The wind weakened. The marching footsteps continued past our house toward the other homes in the village. Father looked at the door. "It is open," he called, his voice trembling. "Come in, darling." He sounded as if he could hardly believe the words. Father had attended a festival when he was young. He had prepared me for this night for years, yet the thought of seeing Mother again still overwhelmed him. No one could truly prepare for the return of love after living so long without it. The door slowly opened. Darkness waited beyond it. Then Mother stepped inside. Her bones rattled with every movement. Old flesh moved wetly around her joints. She was just as beautiful as I remembered. The sickness had destroyed her living body, but death had purified her. Small patches of rotted scalp remained on her skull. They had an amber color, like tree sap hardened against bark. Once, long red hair had grown there, the same color as the apples in the orchard. Her fingers were thin bones covered in strips of black flesh. The strips hung from her arms and ended near the clean white bone above her elbows. Pieces of decayed tissue dangled from her golden ribs like parts of a ruined dress, but none of that mattered. I saw her smile. There were no lips on her face, yet I could clearly see the expression I remembered. The corners of her mouth lifted. Her empty eye sockets gazed lovingly at Father and me. The boils were gone. The lumps were gone. The demon's marks had disappeared. She was pure. She was love. Mother stepped farther into the room. Her jaw opened with a long creak. Words came from a throat that no longer existed. "Hello, Samuel," she said. "Hello, Sarah. It is so wonderful to see you both again." Her voice sounded dry and broken, but the meaning had not decayed. Father stood. He limped toward her while Mother moved toward him with a clatter of bone. They embraced. Father's sick body pressed against Mother's almost empty one. It was a meeting at the edge between life and death. He was approaching the threshold. She had already crossed it. They rested their foreheads together. Then Mother released him and walked toward the table. Before I knew it, her skeletal thumb was moving beneath my left eye. It wiped away my tears. I expected the bone to feel cold and rough. I expected the remains of tendons and rotting flesh to leave stains across my cheek. Instead, I felt only her care. There, she whispered. "It is all right." Her empty eye sockets turned toward the apple in my hands. "Is that for me, little bird?" Hearing my old nickname filled me with warmth. "Yes, Mother, it is a gift for you." She took the apple and held it high. Her empty sockets examined the bright red fruit. "From my favorite tree," she said. "Thank you, little bird." She placed it carefully on the table. She could not eat it, but that did not matter. The thought was enough. Mother looked at the tools Father had prepared. "I see your father has prepared my gift for you," she said. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Mother." I had never felt more excited. No present or celebration could compare to this. Soon, I would be free to dance. I would stand beside Mother at the threshold and join everyone taking part in the festival. Tonight, the demon had no power over us. We would dance and laugh until sunrise. We would be pure. We would be love. My body shook against the table. I could not feel the wood moving beneath me, but I knew I was trembling like a worm pulled from the earth. Mother placed one hand on my right shoulder. Her other hand lifted a scalpel. The polished blade shone in the candlelight. "Then let us begin, little bird." The first thing I noticed was the sound of wet tearing. I had heard similar sounds while preparing animals for dinner. Rabbits were common near our village. Father often took me hunting in the woods. He taught me to use a bow and, more importantly, how to strike the place that would end the animal's suffering quickly. Afterward, I would hurry home with the rabbit hanging from my hand. Mother's tired face would brighten when she saw me. She would show me how to prepare the body, even though she had already taught me many times. I often pretended to forget because the process disgusted me and because I wanted her beside me. As Mother worked the scalpel across my numb body, I remembered those lessons. The procedure was not very different. She made deep circles around both ankles. Blood gathered near my feet. Then she made a lighter cut around my waist. Mother slid her fingers into the opening. I could not tell the difference between the edge of the blade and the touch of her decomposed hands. Then came a sound like bandages being slowly pulled from a wound. Mother removed my skin in 2 long sections. The lower half came away first. Father helped with the tweezers so my feet could slide free. The upper half followed like a shirt being pulled over my head. It was wonderful. I felt as if a terrible weight had been removed. I raised my hands in front of my face. The exposed flesh of my palms was brilliant red, like the apples from the dead tree. Dark veins ran beneath the surface, surrounded by thicker crimson muscles. I was so amazed by the beauty of my new hands that I almost did not hear Mother. "Look, darling, it is you." She held up the skin from my upper body as though it were an old coat. I sat up and smiled as widely as my uncovered face allowed. Mother wrapped her arms around me. We remained together for what felt like forever. I had reached the threshold. My raw body rested inside the gaps of her skeleton. I would remain in this perfect state until dawn, when the festival ended. "You are ready now, Sarah," Mother said. "Come, there is no time to lose." Father shuffled into view. "Look at my beautiful girls," he said. He took my skin from Mother with his gloved hands and placed it on a clean table. Beside it waited a box of needles and thread. He would repair it before morning so it could be returned to me. "Father, are you not coming with us?" I asked. "It will be years before the next festival." He smiled sadly. "No, little one." He pulled open his shirt and showed us a circular scar around the lower part of his chest. Lumps surrounded it like a group of yellow stars. "I attended the festival once before," he said. "I cannot take the place of someone who has never experienced it. But the sickness, do not worry about me. Go and live while the night is still young." He leaned closer but did not touch me. "Go with your mother, little bird." Outside, hundreds of footsteps filled the village again. These were not the organized steps of the dead marching from their graves. These were the wild, uneven beats of dancing. Mother took my hand and led me outside. The festival filled every road and field. Old skeletons danced beneath the moon, their clean white bones shining. Fresher bodies sang and laughed as pale skins slipped from their limbs. Skinless living people joined them. Their feet left red prints across the grass. Laughter and cheering echoed through the night. Many voices were dry and broken, forced from lungs that had not moved in years. But there was joy in every sound. Mother held my exposed hand tightly as we moved between groups of dancers. I recognized people from the village. The tall body of the baker danced slowly with his shorter wife. Their 2 dead sons ran circles around them. The blacksmith stood near the well with one arm missing. Beside him, his skinless daughter waved when she saw me. I waved back. For one night, no one feared sickness. No one locked their doors. The living and the dead touched, embraced, laughed, and danced. Mother and I joined them. We spun through the streets. Her bones rattled in time with the music. My uncovered muscles shone beneath the orange moon. There was no pain. There was no fear. Eventually, we left the crowd and sat together near the graveyard. I rested my head against Mother's shoulder. It was hard and cold, but I felt safer than I had felt in years. We looked up at the moon. It was large and orange, hanging above the village like a great apple growing from a black tree. I knew the night could not last. Soon, the moon would fall behind the hills. The sun would rise. Mother and the rest of the dead would return to their graves. Father would stitch my skin together and place it back over my body. The next festival was many years away. By then, I would be older. Father might be buried beside Mother. The village might be completely empty. Perhaps the sickness would take me before the next celebration. The thought frightened me. But Mother placed her fingers around mine. For now, we were together. For now, we laughed, we cheered, we danced, we lived. And for that one beautiful night, it was enough.